Check this out, right? I'm gonna be honest with y'all. I done lost count of how many episodes we done did this shit. But either way, you're watching Versus. This is somewhere between 5 and 7. I know that it's between 5 and 7. But either way, I got a special topic for y'all today. Twisted joint. And I'll see y'all on the other side.
Nah, I definitely agree with that shit. Damn, Beretta, man. Fuck. Bro, I know you got bicycle, man, but you gotta think sometimes. Shit. Some of this shit don't even call for. Bro, I was talking to my suckers on the road. Listen, mirror on the wall. Who the really nigga in it?
Before we really dive into it, I do want to say this though. I just had me a sandwich earlier, you know what I'm saying? And listen, if y'all not fucking with that honey barbecue sauce, you're missing out, you know what I'm saying? This shit right here is gonna make you retire ketchup. For real. Honey barbecue sauce, that shit goes on anything. Anything that's meat, you can put that shit on, no exaggeration. Try it. Like, literally try that shit. But anyway, back to what everybody's here for. I just, you know what I'm saying, as they come to me, I put them on wax, you know what I'm saying, throw them shits out to y'all, you know what I'm saying, because I feel like the mind is a thing that you have to keep stimulated. You got to keep that shit moving, you know what I'm saying, or you'll start losing that shit. All right, so with that being said, 90s versus the 2000s. When I say the 90s versus 2000s, the 90s from 1990 up until 1999, December 31st, and the 2000s would be from 2000, January 1st, 2000, up until 2010. You know what I'm saying? Decade upon decade. And we're going to rate them based on events that happened, events which ones was worse, what had the most impact on today's society, what ramifications are we still feeling from each one of those decades, the things that came out, how memorable it was. Like, there's a lot to get into with that. And at the very end, I'll give my opinion on which decade I think was the overall winner. So with that being said, man, welcome to Versus, boy. This one right here gonna be interesting. Let's see where we land. All right, so first of all, to tackle something as complex as the 90s versus the 2000s, we're going to have to get a real big reference point. What I mean by that is a guideline, a basis. So what I want to do, I'm going to start off with, let's go to the 90s. We'll start with the 90s first, chronological order, so you motherfuckers can keep up, right? Now, seeing as that, yes, I am on the older side, you know what I'm saying? So, shit, I seen both, you know what I'm saying? Shit, in the 90s, I was up old enough to remember a lot of key moments, right? So, a couple of key things to take from the 90s. Like, a lot of this is probably going to be around you motherfuckers' childhoods and shit like that, right? So, a few things to me that sticks out about the 90s. First thing I think of when I think of the 90s, for me personally, it's probably going to be Home Alone. Home Alone was my shit, man. That Macaulay Culkin, man, I don't know, but you gotta understand, I was like a fucking kid. I think I was right at 1990 when that shit first fucking came in. You know what I mean? Oh, man, I think I watched that movie like a million fucking times. Like, I know that shit now to this day. I think of that. I think of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Power Rangers. I fuck with them real heavy. Back then, like I said, man, Saturday mornings was like full of fucking cartoons. I do remember that. I remember, I think it was like Nickelodeon versus kind of like Disney. Like they kind of had a little thing, but somewhere between, I think it was, might have been right at the early 90s, or might have been a little bit before, like, you know what I'm saying? I don't want to, like, misquote, like, you know what I'm saying, to get the years wrong. But somewhere up in there, Disney took off with the movies, right? And them Disney movies, like, started crushing Nickelodeon. Like, I fought with Nickelodeon. They had, like, Doug. They had fucking, Rugrats. Man, it was a bunch of, like, shows from that I watched as a kid, right? But when it came to movies, I mean, that shit wasn't even close, man. Them motherfuckers had Aladdin. Them motherfuckers had, like, Little Mermaid. Them motherfuckers had all type of shit that turned out to be fucking classics. I mean, you can go down the list. Like, Disney was, like, churning them shits the fuck out. So those are some of the things that I think about when I think of the 90s. Also, video games. Like, them shits was just really kind of starting. Like, and it's funny because a lot of people, like, before my generation, they tell me about, like, the Atari. Like, Atari was something that was a little bit before me. Never played one. I seen one, and, like, I was laughing at that shit. Like, what the fuck is this? How you play that shit? But I do remember the Nintendo. Man, Money Food just had us a little debate about that. The Nintendo was like one of the first video games, right? And don't get me wrong, that shit is nostalgia like a motherfucker, you know what I'm saying? But, and Money Food, if you watching, I'm gonna tell them the same thing I told you. I fucks with the Nintendo, but the Nintendo was first, right? When the Sega came out, that shit is not fair to the Nintendo, not the first one, you feel me? Because they had a leg up. Like, they didn't come out at the same time. So that's a whole different argument. But anyway, the Nintendo was the one, to me, that really started the whole video game thing. Super Mario, Mario Kart, Donkey Kong, shit like that. Oh, man. Wow. And I'm like I said, this right here has got to be early 90s. I'm talking about, ooh, yeah, early 90s. And then whatever, I can't even remember the name of the game, but I just remember that bitch had a big, long orange gun that you plug up to that shit and had some ducks on that shit. You know what I'm saying? And niggas just used to. Matter of fact, this is a true story. Y'all ain't gonna believe it, but this is a true story. I played that shit right in this fucking room. I think I had to be like maybe 2, 3 years old. Shit was right here on this fucking wall. Believe it or not, man. Wow. Now that brings back some fucking memories. But yeah, those are early 90s, so covered games, you know what I'm saying? Entertainment, like I said, I mean, because back then, you know, I'm a kid, so most of the big time entertainment, like, I really got most of it through the news now. As far as sports wise, this is what stuck out to me as a kid. Like I said, I'm developing my insight on the world, right? What stuck out to me in the 90s, sports wise, obviously in basketball, there was nothing other than Michael Jordan. If Michael Jordan was like boom, everybody else was boom. Now I understand they had the Magics, the Birds, and all of that, but keep in mind, I'm born in 1987, December. So by the time 1990 come, I'm turning 3 years old. You know what I'm saying? So by the time I'm old enough to really start watching and knowing what's going on, Jordan had already been Jordan. Now, as I got older, I learned like that he had to go through some shit to get to Jordan. I'm just speaking on just how my view of the 90s. Jordan was the king of basketball. Like, I mean, no disrespect to Magic, Bird, none of them guys at that time. But my first, I guess, real, I guess you want to say fan, the first celebrity I was a fan of was Michael Jordan. Like, that nigga did Space Jam. Cause I mean I'm a kid, man, so yeah, I fuck with Bugs Bunny, man. Who doesn't fucking fuck with Bugs Bunny? I fuck with Bugs Bunny, and to know that this nigga did a movie with Bugs Bunny and Michael Jordan, like that shit blew my fucking mind. And then, like I said, for him to have, a lot of other guys. One thing that really, just as a quick aside, what really kind of like really made me like really gravitate to Mike, and when I really fuck with Mike, don't get me wrong, best basketball player of all time. Now, and I don't want to give too many spoilers, but we will be discussing that later on in this series about that. Measy F, we gonna have that debate. But anyway, back to what I was saying. What really kind of gravitated me to Mike wasn't just because like this nigga like balling, dominating on the court, but it's because all these other guys, his contemporaries, all these other guys who play with him, who play against him, who don't even like him, who not really like on his nutsack or nothing, like they really like, man, fuck this nigga, I'm tired of this nigga. Even them had to say he's that nigga. Do you know what you gotta do for an alpha male to have to give you have to really let him see that he can't beat you? And for me, that's was the first place I seen that, because on TV he was the nicest guy, kept it so nice and mellow, and you know what I'm saying, never really yelled and was all calm. But I always wondered, how do all these other superstar athletes, why do they all agree that he's the best? You know what I'm saying? If you in the NBA, you should feel like, well, fuck it, I'm gonna try to beat him. But as I got older, I found out why. Because that nigga's mindset was on some, hey, no, if you feel like you that, then let's go find out. And that's another thing about the 90s. The 90s was much more personable. Like, as time and technology got better and better, I think we started to lose that personal touch. Like, now everything is at a distance. Everything is about your feelings and being accepted and being respectful and making sure that we don't say the wrong thing to offend anybody and all that shit. Back then, it was more like, hey, look, bro, I'm trying to do this. And if you in the way of me doing this, fuck you. You know what I'm saying? It's like, it's not aimed at just tearing you down or disrespecting you or in any form of fashion. But I'm so driven on doing what I'm trying to do till you are an afterthought. Your feelings are an afterthought. Like, you know what I'm saying? See, now it's like you can't just say fuck a nigga. You know what I'm saying? You can't just say, man, fuck them bitches. Like, you can't say shit like that, right? Because everybody gets all wrapped up in whatever, whatever. But I personally, like, I love that shit. If you feel like you're the best in something, right? And you feel like a motherfucker can't beat you, I feel like you not wrong for telling him that. You know what I'm saying? Because if he felt different or if anybody else felt different, then prove you wrong. You know what I'm saying? But that's a whole nother story for another day. We still talking about the 90s. So, and that was in basketball. Now, football was more complicated, but I loved football. You know what I'm saying? Because growing up down here, you know what I'm saying, especially coming up here from Grubber, y'all already knew it. Tampa was like, football was like king. Like, that's how I got introduced to this tomahawk. You know what I'm saying? That Seminole shit, like, man, oh man, Saturday college football was like, whew. And when I think 90s, man, first thing come over, I think of fucking FSU football, bro. It was hot in the 90s, boy. Shit, Peter Ward, Vernon Cove. Man, we had work done. We had a few of them, man. Shit, yeah, man. Those were the days. But it made me want to play football, you know what I'm saying? And I had this weird dream of being a Florida State Seminole, even though I was like the smallest thing on the field, right? But I could run. But anyway, Dion, motherfucker, you know what I'm saying? Like, Dion, when I think of the 90s, even though he did his thing in Florida State way before the 90s, but Dion in the 90s, to me, just because I loved his showmanship, that was the first time I seen shit like that on the NFL level. Like, Dion coming through that bitch with the bandanas, the gold chains, nigga jumping from Atlanta to, you know what I'm saying, playing baseball and football, talking hella shit. Like niggas never get no fucking rest, but balling at both of them, catching interceptions, running punt returns back, all that shit. So Dion was my dude in football. Even though I know, you know what I'm saying, he probably a lot of other people that you could also throw in there, but for me, I'm just talking about me and what I think of when I think of the 90s. You know what I'm saying? So that covers the football, right? Because damn, boy, Dion was my dude. But I gotta also throw this other little tidbit out too. And because me and somebody else was arguing about this. People lose how valuable Allen Iverson was to the NBA. Because just like I was just saying about Michael Jordan and how, like, you know what I'm saying, professional he was, and he, you know what I'm saying, said all the right shit and all that. That's what, like, they expected from, like, rich people and, like, famous people, especially black people, you know what I'm saying. But this nigga Allen Iverson was, like, one of the first ones that was like, man, why the fuck should I have to talk like you want me to talk? And, you know what I'm saying? Like, that and what ended up doing, believe it or not, y'all might not even believe this, but that shit actually ended up in a weird way sending him to prison. Cause shit, that shit in that bowling alley, you can't convince me that that shit wasn't just because they wanted to show him like, nah, bro, that ain't how you act on this level. You feel me? But anyway, that's just that type of attitude. I love that attitude, and see that attitude is like, that's why these generationals, like, it changes from generation to generation, because the shit that you look up to changes. You feel me? Like the shit I'm looking up to as a kid, like these motherfuckers, for better, for bad, or for worse. I mean, they got attitude. They standing up for what they believe in. You feel me? So that covers pretty much most of that. Like I say, music. I think the other show kind of indulged into where my mindset was there. Like Tupac was my dude. Like I said, I had a thing for like that brashness, like for a motherfucker to be small but talking the same shit to the biggest, to whoever, whenever, and having another alpha male, another person that does the same thing you do, have to sit there and acknowledge that you are better. Like to me, that's what competition is about. And the last place I really saw that was in the '90s. Like I said, like back then, I was when I say competition, like I'm in competition, like what are you willing to risk for that shit? It's one thing to just be like, okay, you beat this guy, but what if this guy feel like, nah, fuck that, you know what I'm saying? You finna come at your throat. Like, would you come at his? You know what I'm saying? Like Kevin Winslow say, for the you nigga, you're a soldier, you'll die for that shit. But the point is, you believe in yourself so much that it's fuck the other side. It's fuck whoever the opponent is. You know what I'm saying? Like if they want to take it there, they take it there. Like that's the type of shit like that it inspire. You know what I mean? So like I said, I'm not condoning violence and all of that shit, yada 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 yada. But what I'm saying is it was less kissing and hugging and everybody trying to be business partners and shit. It was more of I'm better than you. You know what I'm saying? You are underneath me and I'm gonna show you. And I'm not gonna be the one to tell you that. You're gonna see it for yourself and you're gonna have to acknowledge that to the world. So now that we've pretty much got the basics out for the 90s, let me go and discuss the 2000s. All right, so now let's go ahead and jump into the 2000s. Now, obviously, like the first thing that kind of comes to mind when you think about the 2000s is what? For me, first thing I think about when I think about the 2000s, obviously, was Y2 fucking K, man. Like, I remember, I think I had to be, what, 7th grade, 8th grade when that shit was turning into 2000. And they really thought, like, the world was going to come to an end. Like, there was, like, motherfuckers, like, shutting schools down, like, sending people from out of, like, you know what I'm saying, their jobs and shit. Like, that shit was, like, scary because the computers was, like, really, not the computers themselves as a new thing, but the internet was really kind of taking its infancy steps, so to speak. You know what I'm saying? Like it really came in the '90s, but it didn't really blow up until like the 2000s. But you know, at the time, I mean, it was new. It was some shit that those numbers hadn't changed since the computer had been made. So it's like everybody was like scared as shit. You know what I'm saying? So that's kind of how that shit really brought in, and obviously in the '90s with the death of like Pac and Biggie, man, that shit kind of had music kind of like niggas was scared to really like be on that shit because they want to blame the music. Like now, this is what's baffling to me, right? Niggas was getting murdered in the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, 2000s, 2010s, 2020s. But for whatever reason, because those two guys was beefing, rapping against each other, whatever, and they both ended up dead. Some kind of way, the music was the reason for all the killings. But I mean, that's just kind of the war against black folks and how they want to try to control and. But that's a whole nother story for a whole nother day. The point is that hip hop took a different type of route because what that ended up doing is it kind of slowed things down as far as because New York was a big powerhouse and at that time the West Coast was the powerhouse. But what it ended up doing, that gap, that time frame, it was just enough time frame for the niggas in the South to start doing their thing. Like that's when you really started hearing a lot of Southern music. You had your Outcasts in Atlanta. You had motherfucking Cash Money. You had No Limit coming out of New Orleans. So like that whole thing to me, that's how I see it now. Like I said, I'm not saying this shit is like basically uh, uh, tip for tip, like straight down the timeline. I'm just saying it as I remember as I was coming up from my 90 transition to the 2000s. Like, that's when I really got heard more Southern music. Then this nigga T.I. came. You know what I'm saying? Like, that nigga T.I. for me in the 2000s, for me now, just talking about for me, was one of the first people that I heard really, like, talking about that trap shit. You know what I'm saying? It's like, people been selling drugs. Like, Master P had a whole ice cream man shit, you know what I'm saying? But the lingo, the terminology, like, the way he talked, you know what I'm saying? It's like that country, you know what I'm saying? It's like, I think that kind of opened the door for people to develop what your sound is. Like, because I think before then, everybody kind of had an idea of what music's supposed to sound like. And to me, that's like saying, what is a picture supposed to look like? It doesn't have a set thing to look like. It's art. You know what I'm saying? It's unique. But the point is like, up until then, it's like, I think a lot of the New York cats, just for whatever reason, didn't like the style of the guys, or with the Jerry curls and all that shit. That shit's different. But I could feel the same way from both sides, because as I said on one of those other episodes, some niggas got some hard ass lyrics, but they style of beats and shit is just not my cup of tea. Now, the Jerry curls and shit over on the West Coast ain't my cup of tea neither. The point that I'm making is, just because it's something that I don't rock doesn't mean the shit not hard to your area or your region. So for me to just close it off and say, oh, that's whack, just because it's something that I'm not into, is, I think, what was keeping music down. But that's why I give them niggas Outcasts a lot of credit, because they really came and they took whatever you thought rap was and put a fucking piece of dynamite to that bitch and blew it up, because that shit was, if you talking about fucking different, that shit was fucking different. But like I say, that's when I really seen like the South, because the niggas down South talk more like the people that I'm around, how they talk. Like, they don't say back, they say bite. You know what I'm saying? It's like, that shit was like weird. Like, see, they used to like think we was uneducated because we talk like that. You feel me? But now that it's other people talking like that and making hella money talking like that, that was a game changer. Like, you didn't have to be a fucking wordsmith or a motherfucking cripple or blood or some shit like that. You know what I'm saying? Like, down south was making music. But with that also being said, I said all of that to say this one caveat. What that also did do too, because niggas been selling drugs for the longest. But in the South, it's a little bit different. I'm going to tell you what I mean by that. In New York, I consider they crimes, hustling, all that shit, to be somewhat organized. You know what I'm saying? Because they got such small real estate, but they got so much money on that real estate. You know what I'm saying? Like, they land is not spread out like in the South. They have to build up. Like, so like, if y'all watch The Wire, like, that's why them getting them towers and like their projects and shit, them shits go up. You know what I'm saying? So it's like, it's a small area based on geographics, but the population within that area is gigantic. But you'll have a motherfucker running that shit from a whole different area just because of the amount of money that he's, you know what I'm saying? That's what I'm saying. It was like, it was more organized control. When I think out west, that shit was more like, listen, over here, these niggas Pyru, these niggas like Boom Boom, these niggas over here, Crenshaw, these niggas like 6ix9ine. It's like, they control this, they control that. Anything outside of that, niggas dying. Ain't no middle ground. In the South, it was about drugs and money. Like, the thing about the South, man, it's like, that shit was based on just that. It wasn't no real, like, trying to, you know what I'm saying, do it like how they do it in New York or do it like they do it on the West Coast. These niggas just have been hustling, man. Like, family from Miami, man. And, like, you know what I'm saying? Rest in peace, Granddaddy Joe. Like, the stories that I've heard, like, from back in those days when Miami was the cocaine capital of the world. Listen, fuck all that other shit. Like, that shit there was a whole animal to itself. You know what I'm saying? So that's what I'm saying. So that's something that I think of when I think of the 2000s. It's like how music transitioned from just being either East Coast New York, West Coast thing like that, right? And then also a few other things that really happened in the 2000s that stand out outside of the South really taking over and not really letting their hands off that bitch, right? Was you kind of started learning about how fucked up this country is. Because the country was fucked up in the 90s too, right? But it was fucked up to a lesser extent. Like, think about this. In the 90s, niggas was worrying about Bill Clinton getting his dick sucked. Like, that was the big story, you feel me? Like, this nigga fucking bitches he ain't supposed to be fucking. Okay, he shouldn't have been doing that, but, I mean, come on, man. Man, get his dick wet. Like, worse shit can happen. 2000s, these niggas flying fucking planes in the buildings, you know what I'm saying? Like, we motherfucking taking fucking motherfuckers to war. We're going, you know what I'm saying? Like, shit was getting real complicated in those 2000s. It's like, a lot of that shit had to do with a lot of oil, too. Like, I mean, what I'm saying is, things got real in 2000. It was real long before, but the only thing we was privy to was really just, like, sex scandals and shit. But all that shit kind of like blew beyond the government covering all that shit up because shit's happening out in the open now. Like, you know what I'm saying? A bitch gotta explain that shit. You know what I'm saying? So, 2000s really is when I think America kind of started seeing, like, what's, you know, how crooked that shit is, even though most of us already knew. And that's also, I think it was around, 2005, Hurricane Katrina. That also was another eye opener for you to really see like how fucked up this shit really is, especially for niggas. You know what I'm saying? Like that shit that happened in New Orleans, man. That was why I remember that shit because it was like that's Mother Nature, bro. It's a hurricane, so it's like you would think like if the government or the Federal Reserves or anything gonna do anything to help, like that'll be something to help because that's not a drug related thing. That's not a murder related thing. That's not something that was self inflicted. That's Mother Nature, man. That's a fucking hurricane. That shit could have happened anywhere and tore anything up. You know what I'm saying? And if it was anywhere else, I would have wanted to come and fix that shit up and but that's like I said, that's the type of climate that you started seeing from the government around those times. So things was getting real in the 2000s. Now, and we also touched on like games and stuff as far as in the 90s. That one ain't even close, and that wouldn't be a fair comparison just because by that time technology hadn't started like doubling the internet. Once the internet hit the video games, it's not fair to compare any other video games that came before that because the internet by itself was a game changer. I don't know if it was a PlayStation 2, 3, or one of those. Whenever they started connecting that shit to the internet, everything else was dead. It was the PlayStation, and the only thing that was even like could sit with it is the Xbox. I love Sega, I love Nintendo, but you can get that Nintendo Wii, you can get the Nintendo DS. All that Nintendo shit was doom. It was on a whole lesser level than those big boys. And keep in mind, Nintendo owned the gaming market. Like they was running shit in the 90s. But Sony took that shit. Like took all that shit. And another fun fact that by the time the 2000s really came, right, a lot of money had just started being moved online. That's when a lot of shopping online happened. That's when a lot of people started getting rich without doing shit. And I think what that ended up causing is a bunch of lazy motherfuckers. I don't mean lazy as far as just effort. I mean lazy as in, remember how I said in the 90s it was more gritty, like more personal, like face to face, like I want you to see like that I'm yada yada yada, I'm better than you at this and that, yada yada yada, face to face competition type. Now everything is at a distance. Now you deal with people as you feel like, you know what I'm saying? Like if you don't want to deal with a bitch, you block them or some shit like that. Motherfuckers don't come see you no more. Like they hit you up on Instagram or they hit you up on motherfucking Facebook or some shit. Like that's when all that shit kind of started, like around the 2000s. So if I was to try to kind of sum all of this up, for me, right, seeing as that now that I'm older and mature, I have more respect for the 90s. And I'm going to tell you why. Because if I would have missed the 90s, and if I never would have seen that, and all I would have seen was the 2000s and up, I feel like I would be a different person. Like I would be, I would be, I would be, I wouldn't really be, I don't know what the fuck, like, you know what I'm saying? Because it's like, that shit from the 90s was concrete. Like, this shit here is, that shit is like Play-Doh. You know what I'm saying? That shit be changing and molding. And you know what I'm saying? And it's like, that's why now loyalty and trust and respect, all of those concepts are going like out the window. Like, if you talk to a lot of old heads, a lot of like older, like, they're gonna read most of their cues off body language. You know what I'm saying? And you know why? Because like in those times, that's what you was used to seeing. You know what I'm saying? Like, niggas was like face to face, was like, see how you conduct yourself, see how you carry yourself. You know what I'm saying? And see like what type of dude you are. See, now everything is done on the internet. Everybody's taking pictures, taking posts, and all of this shit. Nobody ever really knows about competition and confrontation. You know what I'm saying? So that's why I put the 90s over the 2000s. From a technology standpoint, it's not close. I mean, obviously, the technology went crazy in the 2000s. They did GPS. They started giving out them fucking phones. Them phones was like the last catalyst to the old way of doing things. When those smartphones came, it was all over. You know what I mean? From that point on, there was no more face to face interactions. There was no more of the Michael Jordan type competitions. There was no more of the in your face brashness. There was just, oh, this motherfucker said this about your post, or this motherfucker, you know what I'm saying? It was tweets, you know what I'm saying? Shit like that. So I think as a money financial thing, it probably made a lot of people rich, you know what I'm saying? It probably made a lot of money for a lot of people in the 2000s. But I think the work ethic, like the hard working mentality, was lost. I think the 90s had more of that, and I just feel like now every generation seems to get a little weaker just because they didn't have that. That's why I was saying, like, if I didn't experience that, if I was born like 10 years later, you know what I'm saying, and never had seen none of that shit, because that shit is hard to explain. That shit, you would have had to see that shit. You would have had to see two grown ass men fighting, like really on some bucket type shit, but then respecting each other enough to, like, you know what I'm saying? And like now everything is all politically correct. So y'all tell me what y'all think, man. Y'all tell me which side of the tree y'all fall on, you know what I'm saying? See y'all next week.